Good day, everyone. Let's open with this title page that announces the mode of entering this text. It speaks of a confession. It doesn't speak of the background, not geography, not history, not doctrine. Confession is not a report. It is a turning of the inside outward. It is speech that is not neutral. It carries the heat of lived time. Then we can look at the subtitle that quietly frames everything: a journey through seduction, loss, friendship, and long search for truth. This matters because it already tells us that Augustine's story will not be told as a neat staircase of moral improvement. It will be told as wandering, movement that does not yet know where it is going. We are being asked to take seriously the fact that human life is often lived forward without full understanding and only afterward gathered into meaning. The phrase seeds of conversion is also crucial. Seeds are not the fruit. Seeds are not even the tree. Seeds are hidden beginnings, small, easily overlooked, easily crushed. So we are invited to watch for what is subtle, the slow changes, the almost invisible shifts, the moments that did not feel like salvation at the time. Even the visual style, no? Simple objects of learning and devotion suggest that this lecture is a passage between worlds, between books and prayer, between the intellect's tools and the soul's hunger. We enter then not as spectators, but as those who recognize that we too have lived years that only later disclose what they were doing to us. In a lecture meant to be read aloud, uh, these begs you, are my listeners, to prepare for a narrative of inward experience rather than outward success. The geography, Tagaste, Carthage, Rome, Milan, is not merely travel. It is a map on the soul under pressure. We will see Augustine in environments that promise satisfaction, status, pleasure, mastery, belonging, and we will watch those promises fail in many different ways. What will matter is not simply that he made mistakes, but how those mistakes felt persuasive from the inside, how they were inhabited as if they were life itself. So we begin where many spiritual stories actually begin, not with illumination, but with the confidence of someone who cannot yet see what is happening to him. We step into the years when Augustine is most convinced he is building a life, only to learn later that he was building a prison out of his own longings. So we speak of 9 years of deception, 9 years of deception. Uh, so this is from age 9 to 20. Face is enough for a pattern to become self, enough for a way of seeking heart and to a personality. Describes us as the meaning of our spiritual fusion. First, seduce others while being seduced himself, deceived others while being deceived. This symmetry is important because it refuses the comfort of a simple moral diagram. Augustine is not presented as purely predator or purely prey. He is presented as someone caught inside a mutual exchange of illusion. Deception here is not merely lying, it's being taken in by what you yourself are offering. It is a terrifying fact that you cannot be both agent and victim of the same distortion. And this also names two pursuits, the slide, dividing these years as a public quest for intellectual glory and a private adherence to Manichaean religious practices believed to purify the soul. Notice, he's not pursuing evil as evil. He's in fact pursuing something good, glory, recognition, mastery, things that feel meaningful when you are young, especially when your interior is restless. And he's pursuing purification, something that sounds noble. The tragedy is not that he sought meaning, it is that he sought it in ways that could not bear the weight of his longing. This helps to stress the confession's interior logic. Augustine is living as if the world can complete him if he can either rise high enough in intellect and reputation or become clean enough through spiritual technique. This is a deception. This is the condition of mistaking movement for arrival. He is busy, persuasive, admired perhaps, but the soul is not satisfied by busyness. It is satisfied by truth, by something that can hold it without breaking. And yet, we should not flatten these into a moral scolding. The point is to understand how plausible it is from the inside to live this way. Many people do. Many of us have. This is a mirror. It tells us that confusion can last a long time and still feel like purpose. Now the narrative tightens its focus. Instead of describing 9 years in general, it shows us the shape of those years, the split level architecture of a life that looks coherent from the outside and yet feels hollow from within. And we see the dual life of a young intellectual. Public ambition versus secret religion. On the public side, Augustine pursues popular claim was publications, treating toward even its big progress or beats of glass grows you ready even where it is back was this portrait of fame as something that looks like permanence but is made of perishability. On the private side, Augustine follows Manichaean rituals, carrying food to the elect and holy ones, believing liberation is being manufactured inside their stomachs, an image Augustine later calls absurd. This is not presented merely as theological error, but as a kind of misplaced concreteness, the desperate desire for salvation to be a mechanism. If you do X, then Y will be produced. If you feed the right people, cosmic release will occur. It is the wish that the deepest need in the human heart could be satisfied by a procedure. Finally, these the notes we note something communal. He pursued these contradictory paths with his friends, a community bound by shared illusion rather than truth. This is significant. Why? Because deception is not solitary. It has warmth. It has companionship. It can feel like belonging. This gives us a chance to feel like that what it means to live two lives. One in the light of society's praise, one in the shadows of private spiritual bargaining. This duality is not simply hypocrisy, it is fragmentation. Augustine is trying to be filled by two different fountains, neither of which is water. Also, we hit at something psychologically precise. When you live in a community of shared illusion, it becomes harder to wake up. You are reinforced not only by ideas but by affection. To abandon the illusion would not only cost a belief, it would cost a belonging. From split ambitions and secret rituals, we move into the most intimate terrain, the heart's experience of desire. Because once a person cannot locate true rest, even love becomes a kind of searching, urgent, hungry, and easily confused. Here we see the fog of lust. Let the fog of lust exhale from the murky swamp of my concupiscence, darkening and obscuring my heart so that I could not distinguish the clear serenity of affection from the darkness of lust. This is not merely a complaint about desire. It is a confession about perception. The fog does not only tempt, it obscures. It changes what things look like from the inside. It scrambles categories. It causes Augustine to misread his own movements of love. And yet his prayer reveals his inability to distinguish genuine love from physical desire. He delights in loving and being loved, yet without the boundaries of true friendship, illuminated by divine love, his heart remains in darkness. Two images dominate, fog and light. Fog suggests thick immediacy, touch, impulse, appetite, where everything near feels urgent and everything far disappears. Light suggests a horizon, an ordering principle that lets you see not only what you want, but what is good. Here, Augustine is not claiming he did not desire love. He desired it, in fact, and quite intensely. He wanted the sweetness of connection, the feeling of being received. The problem was that he did not yet know how to inhabit love without consuming it. Here you see proper boundaries. And this is not simply about social etiquette. It's talking about the form that makes love coherent. Without form, love becomes appetite, wearing love's face. Augustine is describing what it is like to be moved by something that feels like love, but leaves you emptier. because it cannot hold the soul's full depth. And then, as if the story knows the desire alone cannot steady a life. And so Augustine returns to a familiar place. He steps back into his hometown, into teaching, into rhetoric, towards something structured. But structure is not the same as rest, and familiarity is not the same as healing. So what does he do? He goes back to Tagaste, where he teaches rhetorics. He, he goes back to Tagaste. This slide describes Augustine's returning to his native town to teach rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, essential for Roman public life. Rhetoric is not just a job, it is a world. It is the craft of shaping how others see. In a life already haunted by public acclaim, rhetoric is both livelihood and temptation. It rewards the ability to move people, to win, to impress. Here, Augustine's form the most significant and tragic friendship of his early life. The friend is very dear, his own age, and their bond is old. They grew together, attended school together, played together. This is not simply a casual acquaintance. It is a friendship braided into childhood memory, the kind of friendship that feels like part of one's own body. At this point, it's worth emphasizing that Augustine's return is not narrated as repentance. It is in fact narrated as movement, perhaps even retreat. He is surrounded not by familiar streets, familiar faces, familiar rhythms. And in that familiarity, a friendship blooms with unusual intensity. Precisely because it seems to promise permanence. Childhood friendship can feel like a shelter from change. It can feel like proof that something lasts. But this friendship is tragic. That word, tragic, places a shadow over the sweetness. It prepares the listeners what is about to happen will not merely hurt. What is about to happen will reconfigure Augustine's experience of the world. Because now we must ask what friendship is when it feels like home. What does it mean to love someone so deeply that the self begins to lean on them as if they were unbreakable? Here we see the nature of true friendship. This is quite paradoxical because, on the one hand, it acknowledges sweetness while denying foundation. Augustine admits his friend was not yet truly his friend in the deepest sense, because no friendship is genuinely true unless grounded in God, who binds minds through love poured into the hearts by the Holy Spirit. Nevertheless, their friendship was sweet beyond all the sweetness of that stage of life. Companionship, shared pursuits, mutual understanding. This is Augustine's later voice, interpreting his earlier experience. That tension matters. He's not rewriting the sweetness into something fake. He's saying it was sweet, but it was not secure. It had the flavor of joy, but not the anchor of eternity. Friendship is real, and yet it is vulnerable. Augustine is trying to teach the examiner and the listener how to see sweetness without making sweetness into God. He's also implying something quietly radical, that the deepest test of love is not intensity, but endurance, not ecstasy, but grounding. If a love is not grounded, then it will eventually demand from the beloved what only the infinite can give: permanence, ultimacy, salvation. And the demand, often unspoken, sets the stage for devastation. And then something happens that forces the question, not an argument, not a moral lesson, something bodily, something sudden, something that brings vulnerability into the open. And what is that? Illness and baptism. God was close behind them, an avenging angel pursuing them in their errors. The friend falls gravely ill, delirious, unconscious. In that vulnerability is baptized into the Christian faith without his knowledge or consent. Augustine makes light of it. He assumes his friend's soul will retain what Augustine taught rather than what was done to his unconscious body. An arrogant assumption soon proven wrong. What stand out is Augustine's confidence, informative influence. He thinks ideas and shared life are stronger than sacrament. He thinks that real self is what they built together, and so he laughs at baptism as if mere ritual. But not for long. Augustine trusts what is controllable: education, persuasion, worldview. Baptism belongs to a different order. It is not manufactured by intellect, it is received. And because Augustine cannot yet inhabit receiving, he dismisses it. There's also something haunting in that phrase, without his knowledge or consent. It introduces the theme of passivity. Human beings do not always choose the events that shape them. Often, the most decisive things happen when we are weakest, when we cannot coordinate our own story, and this will matter later in Augustine's own experience of being led. Now the narrative delivers its shock, not merely that the friend recovers, but that he returns altered, no longer the same companion in illusion, the person Augustine leaned on as shared identity. All of a sudden, becomes somebody. All of a sudden becomes someone else. And this disturbs him greatly. So let's look at the triad arranged in this slide. Augustine's assumption, the friend's reality, and the warning. Augustine expects the friend to laugh about the baptism, to treat it as irrelevant. What could water and words do against years of shared beliefs? But the friend recovers into a new clarity. Augustine's jest makes him shrink away as from an enemy. The friend warns Augustine not to speak that way again if he wishes to remain his friend. The baptism has changed him in ways Augustine cannot comprehend. The exegesis here is the collision between two worlds. Augustine thinks identity is built socially and intellectually. The friend's reaction reveals an identity re-anchored elsewhere, an allegiance that now reorganizes his perceptions, his loyalties, even his sense of intimacy. Imagine the texture of the scene. Augustine approaches with familiarity, with playful dominance, with the ease of a friendship that assumes shared ground. And suddenly, the ground is gone. The French shrinking is especially striking. Not anger, but recoil. As if Augustine's words now carry a different weight, as if they are no longer harmless banter, but a kind of violation. For Augustine, this is incomprehensible. He believed friendship meant sameness. He's now forced to encounter otherness inside the person he thought he possessed through familiarity. This is the first time Augustine experiences a kind of judgment that does not come from argument, but presence. The friend's new seriousness exposes Augustine's flippancy. It makes Augustine feels perhaps for the first time that he might be wrong in a way that cannot be laughed away. But Augustine does what many of us do when reality arrives too quickly. He delays it, postpones it. He delays understanding. He tells himself time will return the world to its previous shape. But not so. Augustine, unprepared, stunned, disturbed by transformation, is something to reflect on. The friend he thought he knew had become someone else, or perhaps had become who he was truly meant to be. Unable to process it, Augustine suppresses his emotions and decides to wait, believing time will restore things to how they have been. Augustine misunderstands grace and spiritual transformation, believing human influence is stronger than divine intervention. This is not merely denial, it's a kind of metaphysical assumption that the deepest changes are reversible, that the self is plastic in the hands of social bonds, that everything ultimately returns to the familiar. Here we look at Augustine's inner strategy. He waits. He waits because waiting is a way to avoid mourning. Mourning. If time can restore the friendship to its former shape, then he does not have to confront the possibility that something has been lost even while the friend is alive. Now, Augustine handles disturbance by suppression. He does not yet have a language for interior upheaval except control. He contains the shock. He tries to keep the story manageable. And this is where the narrative is quietly cruel in its honesty. Augustine's misinterpretation is not corrected by a debate. It is corrected by an event. The world does not pause for him to catch up. So the story gathers itself for the blow. Augustine is waiting for the time to smooth the rupture, for life to revert, for the friend to come back. But the next slide, will show that time does not always heal. Sometimes it simply ends. But a few days later, while I was absent, he was seized again by fever and died. Slide is almost bare, a single sentence, abrupt, unadorned. Its power lies in how it denies the listener the comfort of gradualness. A few days later, not months of preparation, not a slow farewell, just days. And while I was absent, absence inside absence, Augustine is not even present at the final moment. The narrative forces him and us to face the helplessness of being human, that the most decisive losses can occur off stage. This line is not only about death, it's also about the collapse of Augustine's strategy. He chose to wait for restoration. Death answers waiting with finality. The friend who was already becoming other is now absolutely unreachable. And so Augustine's interior world is about to undergo the catastrophe that we will see in chapter 6. What does this death do to Augustine? It does more than than cause sorrow. It tears away the illusion that love, once found, guarantees stability. It introduces the terrifying fact that everything you build your heart upon can disappear without your consent, without your presence, without a chance to revise your posture. And note, the friend first becomes spiritually other through baptism. Augustine cannot accept this one. Then the friend becomes physically absent through death. Augustine cannot reverse this. The two absences, spiritual and bodily, converge into a single question. Augustine does not yet know how to bear. But what do you love with me? What do you do with love when what you love is no longer available to you? Grief. Grief so total can transform reality itself. Here at the edge of the abyss, we have seen how Augustine has been restless but workable. Ambition, ritual, pleasure, friendship, laughter. Now the world breaks its continuity. Something is taken. And the mind that once believed it could manage meaning is about to discover that loss is not an idea. It is an atmosphere that can swallow everything. Everything. Thus, utter misery. The death does not arrive as an event and then pass. It arrives as a transformation of the entire world. Augustine says that everything he looks upon becomes death itself. This is not metaphorical exaggeration, it is phenomenological accuracy. When someone central disappears, the world does not remain neutral. It reorganizes around the absence. Objects becomes accusations, streets become witnesses, rooms become traps. His hometown, once familiar, becomes a torture chamber. His father's house becomes a place of strange and bitter unhappiness. This is crucial. Grief, grief does not only hurt inside, it infects space. It rewrites geography. Places that once meant safety now mean exposure. Familiarity becomes unbearable because it constantly says, this is where he should be. Every shared memory becomes savage torment. What once gave joy now inflicts pain. Not because memory is cruel, but because memory is faithful. Memory keeps showing what is no longer possible. Grief is not only missing someone, it is being shown again and again the shape of what cannot return. Here, Augustine is no longer a confident intellectual. He's not analyzing, he's being undone. His consciousness is no longer oriented toward mastery, but toward loss. He does not yet interpret this suffering. He only endures it, endures it. When grief becomes total, it no longer asks polite questions. It becomes a search, frantic, impossible, for what has already crossed beyond reach. Augustine says his eyes searched everywhere for his friend, but he was not simply there. This is one of the most honest descriptions of early grief. Grief. The body keeps expecting presence. You turn half unconsciously, thinking you will see the person. Your senses have not yet learned the new world. He hates all places because his friend is not in them. Places lie because they no longer say what they used to say. Look, he's coming. This is devastating. It means that the world itself once spoke in the language of hope. Now it speaks only in the language of absence. Then, then comes the deeper crisis. Augustine becomes a vast problem to himself. He asks his soul, why is it sad? And why is it troubles him so deeply? But it cannot answer. This is not ignorance. It is the limit of self-knowledge under suffering. Pain does not always explain itself. Sometimes consciousness becomes opaque to itself. He's not just grieving. He's confused by his own grief. His soul is not only wounded, it is mute. It cannot translate its pain into meaning. When pain cannot be understood, the mind reaches for what it has been taught and should heal. Augustine tries to command his soul to believe. But can he? Augustine says if he told his soul hope in God, it rightly refused. Because the true friend he had lost was more real and even better than the phantom he was commanded to hope in. This is one of the most dangerous confessions in the entire world. He's admitting that God, as he knew God at that time, felt less real than his friend. The friend had a voice, a body, shared laughter, shared history. God, by contrast, was abstract, distant, and yet inhabited as presence. The soul refuses because it will not accept a replacement that feels thinner than what was taken. Grief will not be comforted by concepts. It demands reality. Augustine is honest enough to say that religious language felt hollow beside a dead body. This is not atheism. It is grief speaking truthfully. What you lose concretely cannot be replaced by words. Words about the invisible, unless the invisible becomes more real than what was lost. And for Augustine, that has not yet happened. When neither memory nor faith can soothe, grief finds another companion. And what's grief's another companion? Tears. Tears. Augustine discovers that only tears bring relief. They become his sole comfort, replacing his friend as the delight of his soul. This is not poetic excess. Tears become a form of presence. They respond when nothing else does. Weeping becomes the only activity that matches the depth of the laws. Everything else feels false. Conversation, work, pleasure, movement. Only tears are proportionate to what has happened. They are the only language large enough. This is grief at its purest. When nothing else can reach the sufferer, tears are no longer just expressions, they become companions. They sit with him when no one else can. They do not fix anything, but they acknowledge everything. Here, Augustine is not trying to grow or improve, he's simply surviving. His life has narrowed to pain and its expression. But even tears cannot be a home forever. Grief eventually forces the question, where am I now? What am I seeking? Where am I now? What am I seeking? Looking back, Augustine asks, where was he in his grief? Where was he seeking comfort and meaning? And the answer shames him, not in God. Not in God. He's everywhere except God. He admits that if he had sought God, he would not have sought consolation from created things, pleasures, distractions, the world. His suffering reveals not only pain, but misdirection. He was trying to heal an infinite wound with finite things. He says the real problem was that he did not yet know how to love God. This is crucial. His grief is not only about losing his friend. It is about not yet knowing where ultimately weight should rest. He placed eternity on something mortal, and mortality did what mortality always does. This is not moralizing, it is diagnostic. Augustine is beginning to see that the structure of his love, not just its intensity, shaped the violence of his loss. This realization is unbearable at first. It makes him angry, not only not only at loss, but at being human. Augustine cries out, "O madness, which does not know how to love men humanly! O foolish man, that I then was, impatient at being a man." This is not self-hatred, it is clarity. He sees that he loved his friend as if the friend were eternal. He demanded from a human being what only the infinite can give: permanence, invulnerability, finality. His grief was excessive because his love was excessive in the wrong direction. Not excessive in depth, but excessive in expectation. He expected his friend to be more than a human being can be. And when that illusion broke, he became angry at his own humanity, at the limitation, at vulnerability, at the law of death. He did not want to be a creature. He wanted to live as if nothing could be taken. So he becomes a man carrying a soul that resists being carried. In the end, a shattered soul. Augustine says he carried his shattered and bleeding soul, a soul impatient at being carried by him. This image is devastating. He's divided, one part carrying, the other refusing to be born. Everywhere he goes feels wrong. No place can hold him. No consolation fits. His soul resists comfort because it knows comfort is lying. Nothing earthly can give what has been lost. This is depression described from the inside. Being burdened by your own consciousness, unable to escape yourself, unable to rest inside yourself. You do not merely feel pain. You are pain carrying itself. And beneath all this, something else is missing. Something that never truly entered his grief. What is that? The absence of God. Augustine says only God was not there, and this was the deepest problem. God did not come into the memory because his soul could not find no rest in God. This is not a claim that God abandoned him. It is a confession that Augustine had no interior space where God could be remembered as rest. His mind had not yet learned how to lean on what does not die. He becomes a riddle to himself. He asks his soul why it's sad, and it cannot answer. Grief has swallowed explanation. Suffering has outgrown language. He is lost in a dark that seems to have no exit, no dramatic darkness, quiet, total, unquestionable darkness. Then Augustine begins to reflect, does time fix this? Or does time simply distract us from what we cannot bear? Does time heal all wounds? Augustine questions the saying that time heals all wounds. He wonders whether time truly restores what has taken or merely distracts us with new experiences. He outlines the patterns. Something precious is lost. Time passes. New things accumulate, pain lessens, not because the wound healed, but because attention shifted. This is a radical thought that healing might be forgetting, wearing the costume of recovery. That relief might come not from redemption, but from replacement. He's not sure which is true, but the question itself shows growth. He's no longer only suffering, he's watching suffering. He's beginning to think from the inside pain, not only under it. And then, and then he made the decision not to heal, but to flee. And he goes to Carthage. Augustine decides to leave his hometown because because he just remembers too much. Every street accuses him, every face reminds him memory has become unbearable weight. So he moves. He moves to Carthage. This is not adventure per se. It is escape. He's trying to outrun his own interior world by changing the exterior one. He hopes the unfamiliar streets will be lighter, the new faces will not speak his loss back to him. This is not foolish, it's human. When pain saturates a place, we try to leave the place, hoping pain will stay behind. But Augustine will learn what all the grieving eventually learn. Memory travels faster than the body. He has not solved grief. He has only relocated it. Book 5. Carthage, Rome, and Milan. Carthage, Rome, and Milan. Book 5 opens not with an idea, but with a map. Carthage, Rome, Milan. 3 names, 3 gravitational fields, 3 ways of promising a life. But what matters is not where Augustine goes, it is what he carries with him. Grief has not finished its work. Desire has not been purified. Restlessness still hums under its decision. This announces a shift, not from suffering to healing, but from collapse to wandering with wounds. Augustine is no longer merely broken by loss. He's now a man whose interior has been loosened. Certainties have cracked. He's less confident, more porous, more vulnerable to being changed, though he does not know yet where or towards where or what. The cities are not solutions, they are experiments. Each one will offer a different version of meaning: intellectual, social, political, spiritual. And Augustine will walk into each with hope that maybe this is where life finally meets. But before he walks into the next city, he pauses. He does something new. He speaks his life not as a performance, but as an offering. Augustine begins Book 5 with a prayer. Receive the sacrifice of my confessions from the ministry of my tongue. Heal all my bones and let them say, Lord, who is like you? This is important. He is no longer narrating a man explaining himself to the world. He's narrating as a man exposing himself before what he does not yet fully know, before what he doesn't yet fully know. Confession here is not moral inventory, it's existential exposure. He is letting his life be seen. Take note, he's not asking for applause. No, not for vindication, but for healing. And he invites readers not to mock him, but to weep with him, to recognize themselves inside his story. This is a shift in posture. Earlier, Augustine spoke to win, to impress, to persuade. Now he speaks to be healed. Language itself is changing function. But prayer does not instantly reorder a life. Even while confessing, Augustine is still entangled. Even after all his doubts, Augustine remains with the Manichees. This is not hypocrisy, it is inertia. Beliefs, like habits, do not disappear the moment they are questioned. He carries a strange tension. He believes himself sinful, but still believes the Manichees free from error. His doubts about them grow, questions about evil, astronomy, the soul, but he keeps hoping they will eventually answer him. This reveals something painful, of course. Sometimes we remain in systems we no longer trust because we do not know where else to stand. Living error requires not only doubt, but an alternative place to rest. Augustine has doubt. He does not yet have rest. What keeps him hoping is a promise, a name that has been spoken to him for years. The Manichees promise liberation through pure reason. No authority, no mystery, no submission, only demonstration. For Augustine, this was intoxicating. He wanted a truth that bowed to intelligence. But what they actually gave him were elaborate fantasies, cosmological myths dressed in the language of reason. They sounded logical, but collapsed under scrutiny. This is the first deep betrayal Augustine experiences at the level of thought. He realizes that reason can be mimicked, it can be staged, it can be used as a decoration rather than as discipline. What breaks is not just a doctrine, but a trust. The trust that intelligence alone will save him. Still, he waits because they have promised him someone, Faustus. Faustus is the hope concentrated into flesh. For years, Augustine is told when Faustus comes, your question will be answered. So when Faustus arrives, Augustine listens with hunger. He's not seeking conversion. He's seeking resolution. He wants coherence. He wants his mind to stop tearing itself open with questions. Faustus carries reputation like a crown. He's said to be learned in all things, capable of answering any question. And for Augustine, this is supposed to be the end of confusion. But hope that grows too large becomes fragile. Yes, Faustus is charming, agreeable, skilled in speech, but ignorant in the liberal arts. He can speak beautifully, but does not know deeply. Augustine sees the difference immediately between sound and substance, between elegance and truth. What Faustus offers is performance without foundation. This is a devastating moment. Augustine realizes that he has waited years for a man who cannot carry what he was promised to carry. His hunger meets emptiness dressed as fulfillment. This is not just intellectual disappointment. It is existential betrayal. He gave his trust to someone that could not hold it. That could not hold it. And when hope collapsed, it does not always explode. Sometimes it simply drains away. The pattern is clear. High expectation, pleasant first encounter, gradual realization, complete disappointment. This is not only about Faustus. It is about a way of living that keeps trusting substitutes. Augustine now sees that the Manichees cannot answer the question that haunt him. What is left is not certainty, but exposure. He has lost not only a belief, but a refuge. The structure that once held his doubts has itself become doubtful. But he does not leave dramatically. He loosens, loosens things. He took a more reserved stance. Augustine does not break. He withdraws. He keeps external ties, while internally pulling back. This is how many real transformations begin, not with declarations, but with silence. You stop defending, you stop insisting, you wait. He no longer knows what he's waiting for. He knows he cannot stay where he is with the same confidence. This is the birth of interior exile. Restlessness returns, and now it wears the face of ambition. Augustine tells himself seeing Jesus is the whole conversation. We did not destroy ambition. It can't. It merely quieted it for a while. Now it stirs again, not joyfully, but as movement. Rome becomes the next promise. Disciplined students, serious minds, honorable work. Augustine hopes that structure will save him from confusion. But not so. Roman students are orderly but dishonest. They conspire to avoid paying their teachers. They attend, learn, then vanish before fees are due. Augustine discovers that chaos and corruption wear many costumes. Carthage was loud and violent. Rome is polite and deceitful. This teaches him something bitter. Refinement does not mean righteousness. Civilization does not mean truth. Order can hide betrayal as easily as disorder displays it. So once again, Augustine stands in a place that promised meaning and finds another version of emptiness. In short, Rome disappointed him. Rome disappoints, yes, but it does not trap Augustine. Though through the influence of the Manichees, ironically, the very group he is slowly outgrowing, he receives an appointment as professor of rhetoric in Milan. This is advancement. This is success. Milan is not just another city. This is the center of power, one of the imperial capitals. To teach there is to stand close to the machinery of history. Augustine has climbed, but this climb feels different from earlier ambitions. There is less triumph in it, more weariness even. He's no longer convinced that success will save him, yet he still walks toward it. Habit moves him even when hope is tired. Milan is offered an opportunity, but it will become encounter. Augustine does not know it yet, but is walking toward a voice that will quietly unmake him. Every life has moments when destiny does not look like destiny. It looks like another job. In Milan, Augustine will meet Ambrose. In Milan, Augustine meets Ambrose, the bishop whose fame crosses political and regional borders. Ambrose is not only a churchman, he is a statesman, an orator, an intellectual force. And at this point, Augustine is still not a Christian. He's no longer aggressively hostile, but is not converted. His posture is neutral curiosity. He does not come to Ambrose seeking truth. He comes as a professional listening to another professional. This is crucial. It's not just looking to change, it's looking to observe. Tools not he's still standing above what he hears, not under it. And yet, simply by listening, he places himself where he can be reached. Sometimes the door opens not because we are ready, but because we happen to be standing near it. Augustine listens to Ambrose first as a craftsman listens to a master. He studies rhythm, phrasing, structure. He delights in the beauty of language. He's not listening for wisdom, he's listening for techniques. He's tasting form without caring for content. This reveals how conversion often begins sideways. He comes to hear how Ambrose speaks, not what Ambrose says. He thinks he can keep himself untouched by meaning, while enjoying beauty. But beauty is never neutral. It moves the soul even when the will resists. Language is a way of carrying more than we invite. So Augustine listened attentively. Augustine believes he's separating form from content, but in reality he cannot. As he studies how Ambrose speaks, he begins without choosing it to absorb what Ambrose is saying. This is quite a miracle. Truth entering through aesthetic pleasure. Augustine does not surrender, he is infiltrated. The mind thinks it is in control, but meaning travels faster than intention. You cannot listen deeply without being changed at least a little. Here, conversion does not look like thunder. It looks like slow permeation. Once content enters, even quietly, it begins to rearrange the furniture of thought. And that explains why there is a gradual shift in understanding. Hostility to curiosity, curiosity to openness, and openness to understanding. At first, Augustine dismisses Christianity as crude. Then he becomes curious because of Ambrose. Then he allows that Catholic teaching might be defensible. Then he learns scripture can be read spiritually. This is not the certainties where space appears where he's not converted, but he's no longer sealed shut. His mind has developed cracks through which light might someday pass. To see that something might be true is not yet to live as if it is. Augustine realizes that the objections he learned from the Manichees are weak. Catholic teaching has answers, not perfect clarity, but at least coherence. This matters. He can no longer dismiss Christianity as foolish. He now take it seriously. But seriousness is not surrender. He admits it may be true, but he's not yet willing to belong to it. Truth is approaching him, but he's still standing. Then something changes the way he reads. Ambrose teaches him to read scripture spiritually, not only literally. This dissolves many of Augustine's old objections. What once looked crude now looks deep. What once offended his intellect now invites it. The text did not change. Augustine changed how he stood before it. This is a crucial lesson. Sometimes what knocks us from truth is not what we are reading, but how. Understanding does not arrive as possession. It arrives as movement. Movement. Augustine says, I was led step by step away from error, though I did not yet know where I was being led. This is a new way of seeing his life. He's no longer the architect. He's the one being guided. He knows what he is leaving, but not what he is entering. He is walking by subtraction. This is faith in embryo. Not belief yet, but trust in motion. But to walk without destination, that is unsettling. So we see the state of suspension. Augustine is now between worlds, no longer Manichaean, not yet Christian. He has abandoned certainties without finding replacements. He lives in intellectual and spiritual suspension. This is painful but fertile. Nothing grows in closed systems. Growth requires exposure. He's still searching, still listening, still restless. But now his restlessness is honest. And in all these, one unexpected force has been doing so much work. Eloquentia. Eloquence becomes the vehicle for truth. Augustine came for style, but found substance. This teaches him that beauty is never superficial. It can open what argument cannot. The heart is not moved only by logic, it is moved by resonance, by language that feels like it knows you. Ambrose's words do not overpower Augustine, they invite him. And in that invitation, Augustine slowly becomes someone who can be called. Augustine is invited. He's not seized, he's softened, not broken, but open. He's learning how to listen, not just words, but to what is happening to him while he listens. The ground under him is changing. And for the first time, he does not run. Augustine now looks back and sees that his life has never been a solitary project. Every major turn has come through other people. His grief was shaped by a friend. His errors were shared with company. His doubts grew like his awakening began to realize quality accepted. We are formed by those we love and those we listen to. Our beliefs are not only chosen, they are absorbed through proximity, admiration, dependence, imitation. This means conversion is not only interior, it is relational. It happens in networks of influence, affection, authority, and example. We become who we are becoming long before we know what we are becoming. Augustine's story is not a hero's tale of solitary courage. It is a story of being carried, sometimes badly, sometimes well, by the people around him. But people are not the only environment that shapes him. Place itself has been working on his soul. Tagaste, Carthage, Rome, Milan. Each city is not only a location, but a mood of existence. Tagasta is memory and grief. Carthage is noise and desire. Rome is refinement and deception. Milan is listening and slow opening. Augustine begins to see that his physical journeys mirrored his interior ones. Every movement outward traced a movement inward, from restlessness towards the possibility of rest. Yet no city saved him. Cities only revealed what he carried. The real journey was never between buildings. It was between ways of being. And even as he moves away from old errors, one question refuses to let him go: the problem of evil. Augustine's original wound was not pleasure, it was a question. If God is good and powerful, why does evil exist? The Manichaeist answered by dividing reality into two eternal powers, good and evil, locked in battle. This solved the problem by weakening God. Christianity seeks to one God as both one. When he meets, he still carries their central anxiety. His mind is no longer satisfied by easy answers, but it is not yet healed by better ones either. Another obstacle also stands in the way, one that lives not in doctrine, but in the self, pride. Augustine admits that pride shaped his intellectual life. He wanted to stand above, not under. He trusted his own reason more than any authority. He believed submission was for the uneducated, that humility was for the weak, that to believe what you had not proven was beneath you. This pride did not look like arrogance in conversation. It looked like independence of mind, but it made him resistant to anything that asked him to kneel. Before he can accept truth, he must become small enough to receive it. His years of wandering can now be named by three words. Three words. Proud, superstition, superstitious, and vain. Proud in his pursuit of learning and reputation, superstitious in his devotion to Manichaean myths, vain in his hunger for applause and admiration. These are not phases of the same hunger. These are purified, elevated, without being changed at the root. Under all this was a deeper experience, loneliness. The loneliness of a seeker. Augustine was never without people, but he was often without answers. Faustus disappointed him. His Manichaean friend shared his errors instead of feeling them. His questions echoed back without reply. Loneliness here is not absence of company, it is absence of truth. It is carrying questions that no one around you can hold. This loneliness was painful, but necessary. It stripped away false securities and made him ready to be taught by something other than his own confidence. And when he looked back, he sees something astonishing about all these wanderings. Patience of God. Augustine now believes that even his errors were not outside care. God was not absent. God was pursuing him. The avenging angel was also a shepherd, allowing Augustine to exhaust false paths so he could finally turn. This does not excuse his mistakes, but it redeems their meaning. They become part of a story larger than failure. He begins to see that being lost was not the opposite of being sought. Still, two forces continue to trouble him: time and memory. Time may distract more than heal. Memory may wound more than console. Memory keeps grief alive, but it also keeps love alive. Without memory, we lose both pain and meaning. So the problem is not to forget, but to remember rightly. To remember without being destroyed by what we remember. Augustine is learning that healing is not erasure, it is transformation of how the past lives inside you. From this long grief, he draws lessons. What does he learn from grief? Grief taught him that human bonds are fragile, that nothing mortal can be made ultimate. It taught him that created things cannot satisfy the deepest hunger. And it taught him that love must be ordered, not less intense, but rightly placed. He's no longer the man who thought any sweetness could carry eternity. He is learning already what sweetness can and cannot do. Yet even now, he still carries heavy questions. Questions about God, evil, soul, scripture, none are finished. They are not abstract puzzles. They shape how he understands himself and the world. Until they are answered, he remains divided. Not lost as before, but not yet whole. He has left many errors, but he has not yet arrived. he's shedding illusions for sure. Not yet wearing truth fully, but his soul is being made ready, not by answers, but by hunger, discipline through laws, humility, listening, and waiting. And so the Manichaean cosmology starts to break down. Augustine now begins to see something that is quietly devastating. The Manichaeans are wrong not only about invisible things, but about visible ones. Their claims about stars, planets, cosmic movements do not match observation nor mathematics. This matters deeply. If a system lies about what can be checked, why trust it about what cannot be seen? Error in the small is in the small unmasks error in the great. Error in the small unmasks error in the great. For Augustine, this is not merely intellectual embarrassment, it is existential betrayal. He trusted these teachers not only with ideas, but with his soul. Now he sees that they spoke confidently about things they did not understand. The universe itself becomes a witness against them. Reality refuses to agree with their story. And slowly, Augustine learns that truth is not what sounds persuasive. It is what remains faithful to what is. When a great system collapses, something else often rushes in to fill the emptiness. Doubt itself. Doubt. Disappointed by certainty, Augustine is drawn to skepticism. The idea that nothing can be known for sure. This is tempting. If nothing can be known, then no one can be blamed for not knowing. Skepticism offers safety from disappointment. It promises peace through suspension. But Augustine soon finds this unbelievable. The soul does not want clever uncertainty, it wants truth. To live forever in maybe is to starve slowly. Skepticism can protect you from error, but it can also protect you from meaning. Augustine realizes that the mind was made to seek, not to hide. He's learning that doubt cannot be a home, can only be a road. So Ambrose's teaching about spiritual interpretations returns here as a turning point. Augustine sees that scripture is not meant to be consumed only by surface reading. What once offended his reason now invites it into depth. The problem was never only the text, it was the posture of the reader. When you read spiritually, you allow meaning to grow beyond the obvious. This becomes more than a method. It becomes a way of living, not clinging only to what is immediate, but trusting that depth exists beneath appearance. Understanding is not yet conversion, of course, but it is preparing the ground. So Ambrose matters not only for what he says, but for who he is. He is a man who is intellectually brilliant, politically powerful, spiritually humble. He breaks the stereotype Augustine carried that faith belongs to the unthinking. Ambrose embodies a possibility that truth can be lived, not just argued, that wisdom can wear flesh. This is crucial. Arguments can be resisted, but a life well lived cannot be dismissed so easily. Augustine sees in Ambrose not proof, but promise. And slowly, Augustine begins to see his own story differently. Augustine realizes he was being led. Augustine notices that his language has changed. He no longer says, I decided. He says, I was led. He still sought. He still questioned. But behind seeking, something else was moving him, drawing him, loosening him. This does not erase his freedom. It reinterprets it. His life is now seen as cooperation with something larger, not construction by himself alone. He begins to sense that truth is not conquered but received. Yet even now, the story is still unfinished. Book 5 ends without conversion. Augustine is not yet a Christian. He sees that Catholic teaching is defensible. He understands scriptures differently. He listens with openness, but his will is not yet transformed. He knows more, but is not yet new. This is important. Knowledge alone does not save. Understanding alone does not heal. Something deeper must move. Desire. But even incomplete stages have meaning. Three themes emerge and will continue. Disordered love, loving created things as if they were ultimate. Divine initiative, being sought even while wandering. Reason and faith, seeking understanding without making a God. Reason a God. These are not academic ideas. They are the grammar of its life. They will shape everything that will follow. What has happened so far is still preparation, as I said, and as such, something to pay attention to, something to look forward to. I jump to the last one. Augustine ends these books in Milan, listening, learning, opening, but not yet converted. The intellectual barriers are failing, but the barriers of desire still there. His love remains something more than he loves truth. What follows will be a struggle with pleasure, with will, with fear, with surrender. But already something irreversible has happened. He is no longer running blindly. He is being led, and he knows it. Augustine's story in these slides is not a story of a hero who always knew where he was going. It is the story of a human being who kept walking even when he did not understand his own feet. He searched in applause and found emptiness. He loved deeply and lost painfully. He trusted systems that failed him. He doubted, fled, listened, resisted, opened, waited. And through all this, something was happening to him that he could not yet name. He was being shaped by truth, even when he did not yet possess it. What this teaches us is not how to be perfect, but how to be honest. Augustine shows us that confusion is not a defect. It's often the doorway. Loss is not only destruction, it can be instruction. Doubt is not always betrayal, it can be a refusal to accept lies. And wandering is not always waste, it can be the long road by which the heart becomes capable of rest. We learn that love matters not only in how strong it is, but in where it is placed. When we ask finite things to carry infinite weight, they break, and we break with them. Augustine's grief teaches us that nothing mortal can be our final home. But it also teaches us that love itself is not the enemy. Love only needs direction. It needs a horizon that does not collapse. We learn too that truth rarely arrives like lightning. It arrives like dawn, slowly, almost unnoticed, changing what we see before we realize that we are seeing differently. Augustine did not conquer truth. He learned to receive it. He did not engineer his conversion. He was led toward it through people, through laws, through questions, through beauty, through disappointment. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson. Your life is not only what you choose, it is also what is given to you through encounters you did not plan, losses you did not invite, questions you did not ask for, and hopes you did not yet know to name. You are not only building a life is also being built in you. We're not yet done with the confessions. Not healed, not told, Augustine remains open. And openness is not weakness, it is readiness. It is the courage to let go of what no longer tells the truth about you, even before you know what will replace it. So if you find yourself restless, unsure, grieving, doubting, or even searching, do not assume you are failing. You may be learning how to listen. You may be learning how to love more wisely. You may be learning how to be led. And sometimes, or better yet, most of the time, that is really where real life begins. Thank you for listening.